The room smelled like cold champagne and warmed over triumph when Nora Whittaker realized no one at her husband's gala knew she was 6 months pregnant with his child. On stage, Adrienne Cole's arm ringed Sloan Mercer's waist as he announced a new era for Cole and North. A cleaner story, a stronger future. The lights split Nora's vision into hard diamonds. She pressed a hand to her belly, to the small heel nudging from the inside, and saw Sloan angle her face toward the cameras, glossy and victorious. The ovation swelled. Nora slipped her wedding band into her clutch, then disappeared before the next speech could trap her name in applause. Nora had not meant to vanish. Vanishing suggested theatre, decoys and trapdoors. Hers was a survival shuffle, learned from years of living beside a man who wielded silence like a blade and money like weather. She left the gala by a service corridor that smelled of bleach and lemon, the kind of hallway staff learn by heart, and guests pretend doesn't exist. The guard, bored and scrolling, barely lifted his eyes as she passed. Outside, Seattle's rain had started, thin, needling, unafraid to wet silk. She caught a ride share whose driver played classic rock under his breath, and she didn't speak until they were across the bridge, city lights stringing behind like wrought-iron constellations. "Change of plan," she said quietly. "Could you drop me at Harbour Clinic instead?" The driver glanced into the rearview mirror, catching the edge of her belly under the discreet black dress, the weariness of posture more than years. "You okay?" "I will be," she lied. Inside Harbour Clinic, Dr. Reena Patel listened to the story without interrupting. Dr. Patel had the kind of face that made you tell yourself the truth. Nora had met her months earlier when she began prenatal appointments under her maiden name. Back then, she still hoped Adrienne might lean toward her with something like tenderness. Back then, she hadn't watched him rehearse a new future with Sloan Mercer, the woman whose job was turning scandals into symmetry. "Any pain?" Dr. Patel asked. "Dizziness? Cramping?" "No. Just adrenaline." Nora folded her hands, the wedding band indent fresh against her finger. "He announced it like a promotion," she whispered. "No one knows We're going to keep you and the baby safe." Dr. Patel's voice was steady. "You knew this might come." Nora nodded. She had a bag already, tucked beneath a bench at the clinic, packed with photocopies and a pair of walking shoes, a less traceable phone, the banking card for the account she'd reopened in her own name. She'd rehearsed small, lawful exits, a P.O. box, a place in a shelter that didn't turn people away for being married to men everyone else admired. She had learned that safety wasn't always police or locks. Sometimes safety was a woman who knew all the side doors. By dawn, a bed waited at Lighthouse Haven. Small, sterile, merciful. The staff logged her as Noelle White, a name that tasted like a first snowfall. She stowed the dress in a bin and tugged on her softest sweatshirt, the one nobody had bought her, the one that owed its comfort to her alone. She slept clutching a copy of the trust amendment Adrienne had signed last year, which protected any minor child with a guaranteed health fund and a conversion right to shares upon birth. She had watched him initial page after page, distracted by the ping of texts. Sloan had stood in the doorway then, a silhouette of appetite, smiling like she could already smell the ink drying. At 9, Lighthouse Haven's director, a tall black woman named Deirdre, slid into the chair by Nora's bed with a paper cup of tea. "Abuse can look like a spreadsheet," she said gently, after hearing enough to understand. "It can look like a boardroom or a diamond bracelet. We don't ask survivors to prove their bruises." Nora let out a little sound she didn't recognize as crying until it changed shape and soaked the collar of her sweatshirt. Deirdre squeezed her hand. "You're not weak for loving him," she added. You're brave for loving your child more. Nora stayed quiet, because that sentence went through her like heat. Love. She had loved the boy who invented devices out of salvaged parts, the man who built a company with a relentless mind and a terrified heart. She hadn't loved his shame, or the way shame demanded witnesses to control. He'd learned to mute her with money, to press her into carefully curated silence. But love was the fluttering foot against her palm, and the steady thud on the clinic's monitor, and the future refusing to be erased. That afternoon, Deirdre introduced her to a pro bono attorney from a program that served expectant mothers at risk. Maya Ortiz, early 40s, sharp eyes, soft cardigan. She carried a legal pad like a shield and listened like a neighbor. "Here's what I think," Maya said, after skimming Nora's folder. "You don't go to war. You write a map. You've got the trust amendment. Good. You've got the prenatal records. Great. We'll file a notice of intent regarding paternity and the child's rights under Washington law. We'll also place a private guardian ad litem on standby, in case anyone tries to argue your baby's interests without, an actual baby in the room." "Adrienne has a very good legal team," Nora murmured. "Then we'll be better," Maya said. "And we'll be quiet until the moment being quiet stops serving you." Nora blinked hard. Quiet had always been the cost of staying. Maybe it could be the strategy for leaving. That night, as rain slicked the windows with a silver sheen, Nora wrote a letter to her unborn child in a simple notebook Lighthouse gave every resident. She wrote about real oranges and how they bruised if you stored them under heavier things, about the way truth floated, even when you tried to anchor it with lies. She wrote, "I am leaving to make room for your arrival." She wrote, "He may not learn in time, but I will not let that be your story." She closed the notebook and slept, deeply for the first time in months, because vanishing had made space for being seen. Sloan Mercer woke before her alarm, the sky a pale insinuation beyond her apartment's floor-to-ceiling windows. She lay still, measuring her victory in square footage and glass. The gala had gone as planned. Adrienne had said the right words. She had worn the right dress. There was a photograph on the front of 3 business newsletters already. Sloan Mercer, the woman who cleaned Colon North. He texted at 6. "We did well." She typed, deleted, typed again. "We always do." Sloan believed in the value of narrative, the way the right story softened the jaw of a scandal. Everyone thought she liked power for the way it tasted. She liked it for what it prevented. Power meant no one could close a door in your face and tell you to come back with a better resume, or a better father, or a better personality. Power meant her mother's small failures stopped being Sloan's inheritance. In the office by 8, she found Adrienne already at his desk, tie loosened, face grey with the residue of performance. He had slept here. He did that when he was terrified, which lately was almost always. "We should file the paperwork this week," Sloan said brightly. She didn't have to say which paperwork. The divorce, the consolidation of personnel to streamline optics, the severance for a woman who'd been out of sight for months, a woman whose absence had started as an embarrassment and become, unintentionally, a tool. Adrienne rubbed his temples. "My counsel wants to wait on an updated valuation," he muttered. "Simplify the split. I'm not trying to screw anyone." Sloan laughed lightly, like a balancing act. "You're not screwing anyone. You're making your life align with your reality." He didn't answer. When he was like this, Sloan pretended he'd said something romantic and generous. She'd learned that if she supplied the feeling, he was more likely to supply the facts she needed. By mid-morning, a private investigator called her, a woman named Rain, who talked like a dial tone. "No clear sightings," Rain said. "Your wife, Excuse me, your client's wife. Used a ride share but got out before the drop. We're scrubbing cameras. Discreetly, Sloan said. I don't want this messy. Rain paused, as if to assess the humor in that. She doesn't seem messy, she said dryly. She seems prepared. Sloan smiled into the phone. Everyone breaks, she said. Once they realized they lost the plot. She hung up and called the communications team. Draft 2 announcements, she said. 1. Personnel change in family foundation. 2. Engagement. Stagger the releases. Keep her name out of it. We use mutual decision to part ways if anyone asks. By lunchtime, legal emailed a proposed NDA with a number that would make most people stop asking questions. Sloan printed it on creamy paper and slid it across Adrienne's desk with a pen. I don't want to humiliate her, he said, eyes on the window. You're protecting her, Sloan answered. The public is cruel. This gives her privacy and security. It gives us oxygen. He signed, initials precise. Sloan loved the look of his initials. 2 clean strokes, 2 knives crossing. She took the folder to her office and locked it in the drawer. Then she made a second call, this time to a lawyer who owed her favors and liked to be paid in influence more than cash. What do you need? He asked. A safety instrument, she said. If a previously unknown heir appears, something that allows the company to proceed with leadership changes without delay. A baby clause? He chuckled. An equity gate, she replied. Call it optics if you have to. He promised to send language by end of day. Sloan pictured her own face on the cover of a glossy magazine. The headline, something about grit and glass ceilings. She told herself that order was kindness, and that love was the story you told so the world wouldn't chew you alive. That evening, home again, she poured sparkling water into a stemmed glass and scrolled through old photos of herself at 22, cheap lipstick, thrifted suit, big ideas, and felt a surge of pity for that girl. She texted Adrienne. Dinner? He replied. Late, don't wait up. She typed, of course, and did not add the naked and essential question pressing at her ribs. What if the wife didn't break? At Lighthouse Haven, quiet had its own pulse. You could feel it in the laundry room, where women folded towels like prayers, in the kitchen where someone always stirred soup, even if no one was hungry. Nora learned the schedule in a day. The clinic van at 9, the counseling circle at 11, job training at 2, legal clinic on Thursdays, shared chore lists, lights out by 10. It felt like summer camp for people who had walked out of the woods by themselves. She wrote most mornings. The notebook became a ledger of symptoms and feelings, of names she didn't speak aloud, Adrienne, Sloan, of the advice Deirdre offered in small bowls. The baby turned in her. The baby demanded watermelon. In therapy, the counselor, a white-haired woman with kind eyes, asked, When did your love become a contract? Nora laughed, ragged. When he started calling my concerns noise. What if he didn't mean to hurt you? The counselor asked gently. Then it's more dangerous, Nora whispered. Because how do you hold someone accountable for harm they do by habit? How do you prove a wound that looks like a spreadsheet? Maya stopped by with coffee and updates. We filed the notice, she said, and quietly retained a guardian ad litem, GAL, in the event of pre-birth litigation. I also spoke to Dr. Patel about a birth plan that protects your privacy. We don't have to be warriors. We just have to be inevitable. I'm scared of him, Nora said bluntly. Not of his hands, of his reach. Maya nodded. Power is often the story we tell about ourselves, and then force others to act out. His story is that he fixes things. Your story can be that you grow them. Do you think he loved me? The question came out before Nora could stop it. I think he loves control, Maya said softly. And I think he confuses control for safety. Afterward, Nora walked to the water. A gull balanced on a piling, regarding her with the caustic dignity of shorebirds. She didn't know how this would end. She only knew she had chosen a different middle. She placed her palm over the small, confident kick and said aloud, "We are not a problem to solve." That night, she called her sister Lena on the safe phone Maya had set up. Lena had long ago fled the family's eating house arguments for a co-op in Portland, where she taught art to kids who needed brushes more than detention slips. "I'm okay," Nora said when Lena picked up. "I'm safe." Lena exhaled like a storm breaking. "Do you need money? A room? I have space and a futon, and I'm making spinach lasagna that tastes better than it sounds. I need you to know I'm leaving for good," Nora said. "I'm not coming back until I can come back as myself." "You can always come back as yourself," Lena said fiercely. "You're the only person in this family who remembered how." They talked logistics, a suitcase, a storage unit, a few boxes of Nora's life that Lena would quietly reclaim from the Whitaker Cole penthouse when the building staff changed shifts and Sloan's eyes were pointed outward. When they hung up, Nora felt both thin and strong, like a wire. 2 days later, the investigator Rain finally found a frame of video. Nora slipping through a clinic corridor in a black dress. By the time Rain reached the clinic, Nora was at the shelter, and the shelter was a legal fortress with a heartbeat. Rain reported back to Sloan with a professional's neutrality. "She's not lost," Rain said. "She's hiding well." "Everyone wants something," Sloan replied. "Find out what her attorney wants." Rain didn't answer that. There were lines she didn't cross. Instead, she asked, "You ever think the wife is a mirror? That's why you hate her?" Sloan's laugh was a knife's edge. "I don't hate her," she said. "I'm tidying a mess she let happen." But that night, Sloan dreamed of a girl with soft hands, cutting through glass with her bare fingers. She woke with her heart racing and texted Adrienne, "We need to accelerate." He didn't reply. The first time Adrienne realized he had taken a wrong turn, he was 12, and he told his mother he had won an award that didn't exist. He liked the way her face lit, the way disappointment retreated. The second time, he was 22, and told a venture capitalist that his prototype had more patents than it did. He gathered them afterward. Papers like fig leaves. Good intentions. Thin cover. Now 40, he watched the view from his office, barges crawling like beat-up beetles down the slate water, and wanted to push time backward like a barge against a current. He was not a cruel man. He told himself this the way he tracked burn rates. He could list his good works, scholarships, a free clinic, a foundation that said, "We care" in tasteful serif font. He could list the reasons. A father who shouted through his teeth, a mother who performed steadiness like an Olympic sport. He had built a life where shouting was subcontracted to other people, where steadiness was an expense line item managed by women like Sloan. He had loved Nora. He had loved her because she didn't measure his value in headlines. He had loved her until fear told him love was a liability. He had started calling her questions noise when his company needed silence to close a deal. He had started calling her sadness inconvenient when investors wanted cheerful wives beside their CEOs. He didn't realize she had vanished until morning, when her phone went straight to voicemail and the house smelled like lilies from last night's centerpieces. He called Lena, who didn't answer. He called Harbor Clinic and received a polite no comment. He called his lawyer, who said the NDA was ready when he was. He rubbed his temples and said, "I don't want to make her feel like a criminal." "You're protecting her," the lawyer lied professionally. "And yourself, and the company." He reread the trust amendment Nora had insisted on last year, during a moment when anxiety had made him malleable. Any child born of the marriage was granted health care, housing, education, and a conversion right to equity upon live birth, with the board obligated to recognize that right within 30 days. He had signed because she had cried, and he hated tears more than almost anything. He had forgotten that signatures were promises that survived mood. His phone buzzed. "Sloan, everything on track. We'll keep her name out of it." He stared at the words "her name." The absence felt like theft. He left the office and walked, cap pulled low, from South Lake Union to the market where tourists licked rain off their lips and vendors hurled fish to the rhythm of cheering. He stopped at the stall where Nora once bought an ugly, perfect lemon plant and told him plants kept a home honest. He had thrown it away during a minimalist phase. He had thrown away 1,000 small things without noticing. A woman brushed past, belly rounded under a denim jacket, a man walking behind her with his hands in the air like he was warding off the weather. Adrienne felt something like a sob rise and swallow it back into his throat. He wanted to protect, and he wanted to possess, and he didn't know the difference anymore. That evening, Sloan came to his apartment with Thai food and a spreadsheet. "Here's how we sequence the announcement," she said, spreading the papers like cards. "Your board prefers certainty. Our investors prefer good photos. Your mother prefers a narrative that makes you noble. Fortunately, I can give all three what they want." He wanted to ask if she could give him the sound of Nora's voice, forgiving him. He ate noodles instead. When Sloan mentioned a clause to protect leadership from unplanned disruptions, he said, "Meaning, a precaution," she said airily. "If anyone contests decisions based on claims that aren't yet substantiated." "Like a child," he said. He meant my child. The words slept in his mouth like sedatives. "Like any claim," she said. "It's about optics." He nodded and meant it when he asked to review the language. He wanted to be ethical. He also wanted to stop the freefall. When she left, he sat in the dark and listened to the rain. He found a voicemail he'd saved without knowing why. Nora laughing about the lemon plant, saying, "We can keep ugly things if they're alive." He pressed his forehead to the cold window and wished for an uglier, truer life. Dr. Patel marked Nora's file confidential and arranged a private birthing suite at a hospital across the bridge that quietly partnered with Lighthouse. "You won't be alone," she promised. "We'll minimize faces and maximize competence." Maya introduced Nora to the guardian ad litem, a black man in his 50s named Julian Cross, with a voice that made people put their phones away. "I'm here for your child," he said. "That includes what's best for you. Those needs are braided." "Do you have children?" Nora asked. "3, Julian said. 2 grew up on the south side of Chicago and learned to read the street like scripture. 1 is a cello with legs. I'm good at listening to different kinds of music." He drafted a simple plan. Nora's birth would be recorded under her chosen name. Upon delivery, Julian would file notice with the court that baby W had rights under the trust. Maya would move for a protective order that required any legal action to be noticed to counsel, not to Nora directly. They drew arrows on a whiteboard like a football coach. It felt ridiculous and necessary. In the meantime, Nora took the bus to the diner near the waterfront that always needed a morning hostess who remembered regulars' names. She liked the smell of coffee and yeast, the ritual of refilling mugs, the gentle gossip of old men who believed in the moral universe of baseball. She told no one who she was. She told everyone, in the way she held herself, that she was not to be handled roughly. One morning, a woman in a camel coat sat at the counter and watched Nora as if cataloguing her choices. "I used to be you," the woman said eventually. "Different man, different skyline." "What happened?" Nora asked, because women tell stories in diners when they can't tell them at home. "I left while I still recognized my handwriting," the woman said. and left a tip big enough to be a dare. By midsummer, Sloan had tightened the narrative loops. Public foundation statement, engagement photos in a tasteful park, a profile in a business magazine that called her the Velvet Wrench. She had rain shadow Nora's sister, but never long enough to be a crime. She had her lawyer float a rumor. The wife left him years ago. The marriage was over in everything but paperwork. People needed a reason to stop asking questions. Laziness was a reason. Envy was another. Then, one humid night, Nora woke to a band around her belly and the unmistakable truth of a body that had decided it was time. Deirdre called Dr. Patel. Maya gathered papers. Julian called the clerk's after-hours line. 7 minutes apart, the nurse said. We're moving. At the hospital, someone dimmed the lights. Someone murmured affirmations that didn't sound like theatre. Nora squeezed Deirdre's fingers when the contraction crested and saw, weirdly, the lemon tree she had thrown away. We can keep ugly things if they're alive, she thought. Grief and hope braided as the baby fought his way into the bright. Hello, Maya whispered, because Maya was in the room in case the world required lawyers at the first breath. When the baby cried, something in the building's bones seemed to answer. It's a boy, the doctor said, and laid him on Nora's chest. He was furious and perfect, lungs like bells. I'm sorry, she told him, for everything she couldn't yet repair. I'm not sorry, she added. To honor the part of her that had chosen a map instead of a war, they named him Eli in the birth record, simple and strong. Julian filed the notice. Maya texted a single word to Deirdre. Arrived. Deirdre texted back a heart, and then, after a beat, the lemon emoji. Across town, Sloan watched her phone light with an alert from Rain. The message contained one line. She delivered. Sloan stared at the wall and felt the shape of a plan tilt. She did not panic. She did not believe in panic. She believed in adding language to contracts. She believed in making the ground so level that the woman on it could not gain purchase. Accelerate, she messaged her lawyer. File the equity gate. But the next morning, Maya moved faster. She filed a motion sealing Eli's medical records and registering the trust's obligations. She scheduled a courtesy meeting with Colon North's general counsel in a quiet conference room with bad art. My client is not here because she is healing, Maya began, and because she has been harmed. We are not seeking theatrics. We are seeking compliance with existing obligations. General counsel looked old and tired. Ms. Ortiz, he said, we don't negotiate via press releases. I assumed not, Maya replied. We negotiate via law. Julian placed a manila folder on the table, its weight disproportionate to the paper inside. The child's interests transcend optics, he said. I suggest we stop using optics as a euphemism for avoidance. The room quieted. The security guard down the hall watched a soccer video on his phone, with the sound off. The city rain continued its soft systems check on the windows. Very well, General Counsel said eventually. We'll acknowledge receipt. We'll brief the board. Please do, Maya said brightly. We'll be in touch regarding your timing. Babies don't care about quarters. When they stepped into the hall, Maya exhaled a laugh. He's going to call Sloan, she said. She's going to try to set the stage. We're going to move the stage. How? Nora asked when Maya visited her later. Eli sleeping in a swaddle like a mission accomplished. By showing up, Maya said simply. At the exact moment they think presence is a privilege they control. The boardroom at Colon North was set for ritual. Chemically chilled air, bottled water, too many chairs. Sloan had orchestrated the agenda. Leadership transition, foundation restructure, engagement announcement, framed as personal note. Adrienne had shaved, eyes glass clear in that way he could achieve with focus and will. The directors arrived with their laptops and their tolerance. Sloan began, as all good PR people do, with gratitude. "Thank you for your stewardship," she said. The word stewardship doing a lot of moral heavy lifting. "We've prepared a clean arc for the quarter." They were halfway through the slide deck when the glass door opened. The receptionist's polite, "I tried," was a shadow behind three figures. Maya with a messenger bag, Julian with a thin smile, and Deirdre carrying an infant seat covered with a light blanket. "Excuse me," Sloan said, voice cool. "This is a private." "It's an obligations meeting," Maya answered, as if correcting a recipe. "Don't worry. We brought what you need to proceed." She set a packet of filings on the table with a parental patience that made two directors instinctively sit straighter. Adrienne stood. The world compressed to the size of a car seat. Deirdre peeled back the blanket. Eli blinked, the unfocused ancient stare of the newly arrived. For the first time in months, Adrienne's face rearranged into something unguarded. He reached toward the carrier and stopped halfway, his fingers hovering like apology. "Mr. Cole," Julian said, all courtly gravitas. "I'm the court-appointed guardian ad litem for the child's interests. We're here to ensure the board recognizes his rights under the trust within the 30-day window. We thought it would be helpful for the board to understand the stakes with their own eyes." "Remove them," Sloan told security, calm as ice. "Try it," Maya said pleasantly, and two directors coughed to cover smiles they didn't want recorded. General Counsel cleared his throat. "We are obligated to hear this," he said. "We can do so efficiently." Sloan wanted to burn the room down with composure. "We are happy to comply with lawful obligations," she said. "We've instructed our attorneys to file a temporary equity gate to ensure the company's stability." Maya nodded, as if Sloan had said good morning. "You can file anything you like," she said cheerfully. "Courts love filings. The trust predates your gate. We will, of course, litigate any attempt to subordinate a child's rights to optics." Adrienne found his voice. "Where's Nora?" he asked, looking not at Maya but at the baby, as if the infant might answer. "Recovering," Deirdre said. "She doesn't owe this room her body to make her child's rights real." Sloan stepped closer to the car seat, curious in spite of everything. "He has your mother's chin," she said. It came out softer than she'd intended. Something deep and unclaimed in her trembled and hardened at once. A director with grandfatherly hair leaned forward, peering. "He looks like trouble," he said, with something like affection. The room's temperature rose 1/2 a degree. Julian summarized the filings. Maya handed out copies. Deirdre checked the baby's breathing with a practiced glance. And then, because she was a woman who believed in ritual, she pulled a small, ugly lemon from her bag and placed it on the table. "What is that?" Sloan asked, baffled. "A reminder," Deirdre said, "that honesty isn't always pretty. But it's alive." Adrienne made a sound that startled even him. Half laugh, half sob. He looked at Sloan as if seeing her at an angle he hadn't examined before. He looked at the directors and understood, with a clarity that was both humiliating and freeing, that the story needed to change, and he didn't need to be the hero of it to survive. "Record the child's entitlement," he told General Counsel quietly. "Proceed with the trust recognition, and schedule time for me to meet with Ms. Ortiz and Mr. Cross. Without PR." Sloan's head turned sharp. "Adrienne!" "Sloan," he said, not unkindly. "This is not optics. It's a baby." A silence, then, that sounded like a new room being built inside an old house. The directors nodded. General Counsel wrote. The receptionist brought in a glass of water, as if delivering communion. When Maya, Julian, and Deirdre left, the air felt thinner, truer. Sloan gathered her notes with surgical precision. "We will recalibrate," she said. "We always do." But when the door closed behind her, she leaned against the cool hallway wall, palms flat, and realized that not every room could be managed. She had told herself she didn't hate the wife. She had told herself she was tidying. Now she wondered if she had been trying to tidy the child inside herself, who learned early that love and scarcity were twins. The courthouse smelled like paper and ambition. The hearing had been calendared fast. Maya had a way with clerks that involved cookies, clarity, and kindness. Sloan arrived with a team from a firm that named its conference rooms after gods. Adrienne arrived alone, which made some reporters blink. The issues were technical and tender: sealing the baby's records, formal recognition of the trust rights, a temporary order preventing any disparagement of the mother in public communications, a schedule for parenting time that centered a newborn's actual needs rather than a calendar's demands. Judge Elkins, late 50s, an ex-public defender in expensive shoes, looked over her glasses at the assembled council. "I have read," she said, "enough briefs to knit a quilt. What I need now are facts and decency." Julian, with that voice that encouraged phones to sleep, spoke first. "The infant, Eli Whitaker Cole, is healthy. The mother is recovering. The trust is unambiguous. The child's interest is in stability and truth." Maya followed. "My client has been subject to a campaign of managed omission," she said. "She asks not for spectacle but for acknowledgement, protection from further harm, and the freedom to parent without being turned into a press release." Sloan's counsel tried to argue the equity gate, the potential for disruption, the importance of leadership continuity. Judge Elkins held up a hand. "Babies are disruption with eyebrows," she said dryly. "Your client chose to be a father. He can choose to be a leader who tells the truth." Sloan shifted in her chair, annoyed at the judge's domestic metaphor. She preferred metaphors you could monetize. When it was Adrienne's turn, he stood, hands open. He began, and stopped. He had practiced the words in the mirror and hated them. He tried again. "I failed my wife," he said simply. "I let fear make me cruel. I let ambition make me dishonest. I want to do what is right for my son and decent to his mother." His voice did not break. It worked. Judge Elkins nodded like a teacher hearing a late correct answer. "Here's what we will do," she said. She listed orders that sounded like sanity: records sealed, trust rights recognized, a protective order limiting contact to counsel while emotions cooled, a temporary parenting plan shaped by Eli's age, with lactation considerations and a gradual, supervised introduction, mandatory co-parenting counseling with a therapist who charged less than a corporate lawyer and produced more durable results. "And Ms. Mercer," the judge added, turning toward Sloan, "I don't usually address third parties, but you are here and very interested. I will be frank. Your influence has been unhelpful. If you wish your public image to survive, you would do well to adopt a practice called stepping back." Sloan's jaw barely moved. "Understood," she said. She did not, but she understood that further argument would leave bite marks. Outside, reporters shouted questions that no one answered. Maya put a hand on Adrienne's sleeve. "There's a room down the hall," she said. 5 minutes, 1 question each, then back to counsel." They sat in that room, Maya, Julian, Deirdre, Adrienne, around a table that had seen worse. "Is Nora safe?" Adrienne asked. "Yes," Maya said, "and she will remain so." "Can I—" He stopped. "Will she let me see him?" "When it's safe," Julian said. "When it's useful to the child, not merely the parent." Adrienne nodded. "I accept the court's orders," he said. "I also would like to apologize to Nora. In writing, so she can choose when to read it." "I'll convey that," Maya said, neither warm nor cold. "And Sloan?" Julian asked. Not quite a question. Adrienne exhaled. "I'm disentangling," he said. "It will be messy. but I'm done letting my life be managed like a crisis with a budget." Deirdre smiled then, small but real. "That's a good sentence," she said. "Keep writing like that. Redemption is not an epiphany. It is a schedule." Adrienne woke early and read about infant sleep, and realized most of it was lies. He joined a co-parenting class where a contractor named Luis talked about his ex-wife with respect that embarrassed the room into honesty. He called his mother and, for the first time, did not ask her to make his shame sound like a weather report. He saw a therapist who smelled faintly of peppermint and told him, "You confuse compliance for love." He wrote the letter to Nora. He wrote 3 drafts, and then a 4th that was shorter. "I will not ask you to persuade me I am good," it read. "I will not ask you to be my mirror. I will be Eli's father with the humility that requires. I will protect your privacy as you choose. I am sorry. I will act like I am sorry." Nora read the letter on a Tuesday as Eli snored against her collarbone. She didn't cry. She felt a release so subtle it might have been a muscle untangling. She circled 2 sentences and wrote in the margin, "We'll see." She allowed a supervised visit in a room with pale toys and a social worker who liked jazz. Adrienne held Eli as if the baby were both heavier and lighter than expected, and said, "Hi," like a man stepping into lake water for the first time. Eli regarded him with uncommitted dignity, then yawned. Sloan, meanwhile, discovered that stepping back did not mean disappearing. It meant walking the length of her apartment and hearing her own footsteps. She took the call from her lawyer about the SEC's interest in a mischaracterized investor disclosure, manufactured by a junior associate trying to impress her, and didn't immediately pick up a scapegoat. She met with a therapist who refused to be charmed and learned that control had been her mother tongue, born of a childhood where the rent depended on pleasing men who didn't merit pleasing. She went to a nursery and bought a lemon tree, ugly and brave, and set it on the sill. She wrote an email to the board recommending that the equity gate be rescinded in favor of a policy that recognized the moral clarity of not punishing children for adult messes. She pressed send and did not wait for applause. Months passed, stitched by diapers and drafts and hearings that were more check-in than conflict. The temporary orders became permanent agreements with room to breathe. Nora moved into a small rental with light at odd angles and a neighbor who left zucchini on her stair. She took a part-time job with Lighthouse's fundraising arm, writing to donors about invisible arithmetic, how $100 could become a bus pass that became a job that became a life. On a grey Sunday, Lena came up with her spinach lasagna and kissed Eli's fuzzy head. "He looks like a person," she announced, as if this were rare. They ate and laughed, and did not say the names they didn't need to utter anymore to be free. One evening, after a parent group, Adrienne walked home along the canal and spotted Sloan outside a cafe. No makeup, a book open, the lemon tree crisp in his memory like a verdict. He hesitated, then approached, hands visible, voice quiet. "I'm not here to fight," he said. "I'm not here to fix you," she replied. She marked her page and closed the book. They sat and admitted things in the way former conspirators do when the crime has a baby's face. He confessed, "I loved what you did for me. I confused that for loving you." She confessed, "I loved protecting you because it made me feel safe. It wasn't love, it was strategy." They parted with a civility that felt less like defeat than release. Later, she emailed Maya a single-line note. "I regret the harm I helped cause." Maya replied, "Noted. Be better where you stand. It was the only benediction needed." The final hearing was pro forma, a legal term that meant the paperwork had learned how to stand. Judge Elkins approved the parenting plan, commended the parties for sparing the court unnecessary drama, and observed, "The moral of this case is that babies have a way of forcing adults to practice adulthood." Afterward, in the courthouse hallway where fluorescent lights made everyone look equally mortal, Nora and Adrienne stood a healthy 3 feet apart, a sleeping Eli in the stroller between them like a neutral country. "You look well," he said. "I am," she answered, and was startled to realize it was true without caveat. "I wanted to thank you," he added carefully, "for making space for me to learn without letting me rewrite what happened." She nodded. "I don't want you to be punished. I want you to be useful." He smiled then, not the boardroom version or the gala version, but the boy with salvaged parts version. "I can do useful," he said. "I'm learning how to do kind without asking for a certificate." They exchanged the week's logistics, drop-offs, the pediatrician appointment, whether Eli preferred the green spoon to the blue. They did not discuss the past as if it were a country either could still move to. They spoke instead of sunscreen and nap schedules, because survival is a holy thing, clothed in small talk. Weeks later, at a lighthouse fundraiser in a modest hotel ballroom, Nora stood at a podium and told a room of donors a story about a woman who left a party to save a life. She did not say Adrienne's name or Sloan's. She did not mention the lemon tree. She did say we can keep ugly things if they're alive, and watched older women in the 3rd row weep quietly into napkins like surrender flags. Maya introduced her to a couple who ran a grant program. Deirdre squeezed her shoulder and whispered, "You did that." And for once, Nora let the praise land. At home, after Eli fed and slept in a position that looked like a negotiation with gravity, Nora wrote in the notebook she had begun months ago. She wrote, "We are okay." She wrote, "Truth is a room with windows, and I am learning to open them even when it rains." Her phone buzzed. A photo arrived. Eli grinning from Adrienne's arms at the park, a smear of banana on his cheek, a green spoon like a trophy. He said, "Gah!" I said, "It counts," Adrienne had typed. She smiled and typed back, "It counts." Then, after a breath, "Thank you for today. For all of it." Across town, Sloan sat by her own window, the lemon tree stubbornly thriving, and drafted a proposal for a corporate policy she wished had existed last year. No NDAs to conceal domestic harm. She sent it to 10 companies with no expectation that any would reply. 3 did. It was not absolution. It was a window. Nora closed the notebook, walked to her window and opened it a crack. Rain slipped in, soft as a promise. She stood there a long time, listening to a city that could contain both betrayal and repair, a woman's vanishing and a baby's arrival, a lawyer with a messenger bag and a guardian with a voice like a cello. She whispered into the wet air, for the person who had made her brave by being born. "We are here," and let the proof of it fill the room. If you've read this far, you know. This wasn't a miracle. It was a series of unglamorous choices, quiet exits, honest paperwork, hard apologies that turned a spectacle into a life. Nora didn't win by humiliating anyone. She won by refusing to be erased. Adrienne didn't redeem himself by speeches, but by showing up for a child who demanded a gentler father. And Sloan learned, the long way, that control is not love, and optics are not truth. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to start over when the world thought your ending was already written, tap the like button so more women find it. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that vanishing can be an act of arrival. Subscribe for more cinematic, emotionally rich stories about resilience, hidden truths, and the everyday courage it takes to build a different life. Your voice helps these stories reach the people who need them most. The nursery smelled of lavender and paint, a soft, hopeful scent that clung to the air like a promise. Isabella Rossi Jones, 6 months pregnant and swathed in the cashmere comfort of her life, pressed the phone to her ear. On the other end, her husband David's voice was a familiar melody of warm reassurances. "Just closing the deal, Izzy. I'll be home soon." She smiled, her hand resting on the curve of her belly where their daughter slept. "Drive safe, my love." "Always. I love you." The line should have gone dead. But it didn't. And in the digital silence that followed, a new sound bled through. A woman's laugh, sharp and intimate. And the perfect world Isabella had built began to fracture. The mansion on the hills overlooking Austin was less a home and more a statement. A sprawling structure of glass, steel, and cold white marble, it was David's masterpiece, a testament to his success as the founder of Ethelred Capital. For Isabella, an architect by training, it was a beautiful cage whose bars she had only just begun to see. She had designed 2 houses before meeting David, structures filled with warm woods and clever nooks, meant for living and laughing. This house, however, was meant for showcasing. Tonight, it felt particularly vast and silent. The city lights below twinkled like a fallen constellation, but offered no warmth. Isabella walked through the cavernous living room, her bare feet cold against the polished marble. A floor-to-ceiling portrait of her and David, taken at a charity gala last winter, hung on one wall. In it, they were the perfect couple. He, tall and commanding in a Tom Ford tuxedo. She, radiant and adoring, her hand resting on his arm. It was a beautiful lie, captured in high resolution. She found herself in the nursery again. It was the only room in the house that felt truly hers. She had overseen every detail, from the soft grey walls to the hand-painted mural of a moonlit forest. Tiny dresses hung in the closet, and a collection of classic children's books lined a low shelf. Here, amidst the quiet anticipation of new life, the oppressive grandeur of the house receded. Here, she could almost believe in the portrait in the living room. Her phone buzzed on the rocking chair. It was him. "Hey, you," she answered, her voice softening instantly. "Hey, my beautiful wife." David's voice poured through the speaker, smooth and reassuring. "Sorry I'm so late. This deal is a monster." "It's okay," she said, settling into the rocker. "Just wanted to hear your voice before I fell asleep. The baby's been kicking up a storm. I think she misses her dad." It was a familiar routine, this late-night call, a small ritual to bridge the distance his work so often created. He was always closing a deal, always in a late meeting, always flying to some far-flung city to expand his empire. Isabella had accepted it as the price of admission for this life, for the security and comfort he provided. He worked hard for them. That's what he always said. "Tell her I miss her too," he chuckled, a low, intimate sound. "I'll make it up to you both this weekend, I promise. Spa day for you, and I'll spend all afternoon talking financial projections to your belly." Isabella laughed, a genuine, happy sound. "She'll love that. Please just get home safe, David. Always. I'm wrapping up now. Should be home in an hour. I love you, Izzy." "I love you too," she whispered, her heart swelling with an affection that felt as real and solid as the child growing inside her. She heard a faint click, the sound he made when pressing the end call button on his phone's screen. She was about to set her own phone down when she realized the call timer was still running. A pocket dial, she figured. It happened sometimes. She smiled to herself, imagining him rushing out of his boardroom, phone carelessly shoved into his coat. She raised the phone to her ear to press the red button, to sever the accidental connection. But before her thumb could tap the screen, a sound came through. Not the rustle of fabric or the muffled sounds of a car, but a voice, a woman's voice. Is she off the phone? The voice was light, laced with an amusement that was both playful and cruel. It was a voice Isabella recognized, though she couldn't immediately place it. It was drowned out by a wave of cold confusion that washed over her. Then, David's voice. No longer the warm, loving tone he used for her, but something different. Relaxed, unguarded, and laced with the same chilling amusement. Yeah, she's off. Probably gone back to fluffing pillows in the nursery. A quiet giggle. Poor thing. She's so wrapped up in that baby. Isabella's breath hitched. Her hand, which had been resting on her stomach, froze. The baby gave a gentle flutter, oblivious to the poison seeping through the phone. This wasn't a pocket dial. He hadn't hung up. He was still in a room, and he was not alone. She stood motionless in the center of the silent nursery, the phone glued to her ear. The lavender scent suddenly felt cloying, suffocating. Every instinct screamed at her to hang up, to throw the phone against the wall, to scream. But she couldn't move. She was paralyzed by a morbid need to hear, to understand the shape of the monster that had just stepped out of the shadows. God, you were incredible tonight, David. The woman's voice sighed. Closer now. There was a soft rustle, the sound of silk against skin. You closed the deal and then you closed me. You're a king. A low chuckle from David. We aim to please. Isabella's stomach churned. The phrase was so casual, so transactional. The world began to tilt on its axis, the hand-painted trees on the nursery wall seeming to warp and twist. Then came the words that shattered everything. The woman's voice, dropping to a sultry whisper, a parody of intimacy. You're my king, anyway. My brilliant, powerful husband. Husband! The word wasn't a term of endearment. It was a weapon, a claim, a stake driven directly into the heart of Isabella's life. The air rushed out of her lungs in a silent gasp. She sank into the rocking chair, her legs no longer able to support her. But the horror wasn't over. Don't call me that when we're here, David chided gently. But there was no force behind it. Only a shared, secret thrill. Why not? It's what you should be, she purred. Imagine what we could do, you and I, without her. Without the baggage. Baggage, was that what she was? Was that what their child was? Isabella felt a wave of nausea so intense she had to bite down on her lip to keep from being sick. This wasn't just a physical affair. This was a parallel life, a shared contempt for her. She's so easy to fool, though, the woman continued, her voice dripping with disdain. Still believes you're a faithful saint, home alone on your business trips working just for her. She's comfortable, David said, and the word was the cruelest cut of all. It was a dismissal, an explanation for why he tolerated her existence. She's good for my image, the loving wife, the stable family man. It plays well with the board. Isabella felt a tear, hot and sharp, finally escape and trace a cold path down her cheek. She wasn't a wife. She was a prop, a piece of his portfolio. Her pregnancy wasn't a shared joy. It was a strategic asset. There were more sounds then. A kiss, a soft moan, whispered words too intimate for her to bear. She was an unwilling voyeur to the demolition of her own life. The man whose child was moving inside her, the man who had whispered, "I love you," less than 5 minutes ago, was in bed with another woman, dissecting her worth as if she were a quarterly report. Her thumb, shaking uncontrollably, finally found the red icon on the screen. The connection severed. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was absolute. It was heavier and more profound than the quiet of the empty mansion. It was the silence of a future that had just been erased. She sat there, in the soft glow of the nursery nightlight, a ghost in her own home, clutching a belly that felt less like a promise and more like a shackle. The rocking chair creaked gently, the only sound in a world that had just ended. The first instinct was to scream, to hurl the phone against the mural of the peaceful forest and watch it shatter into 1,000 pieces. The second was to call him back, to unleash a torrent of rage and pain, to force him to hear the sound of a heart breaking in real time. Isabella did neither. She remained in the rocking chair, her body rigid with a coldness that had nothing to do with the night air. The shock was so profound, so seismic, that it bypassed hysteria and settled deep in her bones as a strange and terrifying clarity. A storm of grief was raging inside her, but on the surface there was only ice. She stood up, her movement stiff and deliberate, and walked out of the nursery, closing the door softly behind her, as if the baby were already sleeping there. She went to David's home office, a sterile, intimidating space she rarely entered. It smelled of leather and his expensive, spicy cologne. His world. She didn't turn on the main lights, using only the glow from the massive monitor on his desk. She found a legal pad and a pen with his firm's logo embossed in gold. She sat in his oversized leather chair, which dwarfed her, and in the encroaching darkness she began to write. "Is she off the phone?" "Yeah, she's off. Probably gone back to fluffing pillows in the nursery." Her handwriting was steady, clinical. She forced herself to recall every word, every laugh, every pregnant pause. She documented the casual cruelty, the dismissive tone, the way they spoke of her as an obstacle, an inconvenience. She wrote down the word husband. She underlined it twice. "I need to remember," she whispered to the empty room, her voice hoarse. "I need to write this down so I don't convince myself I imagined it, so he can't tell me I'm crazy." The act of writing was an anchor. It transformed the chaotic, searing pain into data, evidence. It was a small act of control in a moment when all control had been ripped away from her. The architect in her, the part of her that understood structure and planning, was taking over from the shattered wife. When she was done, she stared at the page. It was a transcript of her own execution. A wave of nausea returned, and this time it was physical. She rushed to the adjoining private bathroom, a space of black marble and chrome, and retched violently. There was nothing in her stomach but acid and grief. Kneeling on the cold floor, she hugged her belly, her body trembling with violent sobs that made no sound. "I'm so sorry," she choked out, the words directed at the innocent life within her. "I'm so sorry I brought you into this, but I will protect you. I promise. I will protect you from this." That promise solidified something within her. The ice in her veins began to harden into steel. This wasn't just about her pain anymore. It was about the future of her child. She couldn't be a victim. She had to be a survivor, a warrior. She washed her face, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, but behind the devastation, a new expression was forming. It was resolve. She went back to her own bedroom, a space of soft creams and muted blues that now felt like a stranger's guest room. She crawled into the cold, empty expanse of the king-sized bed. She would not call him. She would not confront him. Not yet. A hysterical, screaming wife was easy to dismiss, to gaslight, to manage. A silent, watching wife, however. A silent wife was a threat. He had underestimated her. They both had. They thought she was the comfortable, naive woman who fluffed pillows in the nursery. They had no idea she was capable of strategy. He had forgotten to hang up the phone, and in doing so, he had hung himself. He just didn't know it yet. She would wait. She would watch. She would gather every piece of his betrayal until she had an arsenal so vast and undeniable that he would have no ground to stand on. Silence would be her weapon. Observation would be her strategy. He was about to learn that the woman he had dismissed as a piece of his portfolio was about to become the force that would liquidate his entire world. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to plan. The storm was no longer inside her. It was gathering on the horizon, and she was directing its path. An hour later, the soft purr of David's Aston Martin gliding into the garage echoed through the house's intercom system. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of newfound steel. She took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed the covers of the bed, and closed her eyes, feigning sleep. The performance of her life was about to begin. The bedroom door opened with a soft click. She heard the clink of his cufflinks on the valet stand, the rustle of his suit jacket, the soft thud of his expensive shoes on the hardwood floor. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who believed he owned the world and everything in it. He padded over to her side of the bed. She could feel his presence, his shadow falling over her. She kept her breathing even, deep, the rhythm of a woman lost in peaceful dreams. He leaned down, and his lips, the same lips that had kissed another woman an hour ago, pressed gently against her forehead. The touch felt like a brand, a searing mark of his deceit. It took every ounce of her willpower not to flinch. "Sleep well, my love," he whispered, his voice a perfect imitation of devotion. The next morning, the charade continued. He was a master of the form. He brought her coffee in bed, just the way she liked it, and a small velvet box. "A little something for the most beautiful mother-to-be in the world," he said, his smile as bright and empty as the house. Inside was a diamond bracelet, a cascade of cold, brilliant stones, a guilt gift, a down payment on her continued ignorance. Her stomach turned, but she forced a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "David, it's beautiful," she said, her voice a flawless copy of her former self. "You didn't have to. Nothing's too good for my girls," he said, kissing her belly before fastening the bracelet around her wrist. It felt heavy, like a manacle. She wore it for the rest of the day. The true test came that weekend at the annual Austin Museum of Art Foundation Gala. It was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, a place to see and be seen, a room full of power, money, and carefully constructed images. It was David's natural habitat. Isabella chose her dress with the precision of a general choosing armor. It was a deep emerald green silk gown that draped elegantly over her pregnancy, sophisticated and regal. She was not a wilting flower. She was a queen on her own chessboard. As they entered the grand hall, a symphony of polite applause and camera flashes erupted. David was in his element, shaking hands, clapping backs, his arm possessively around Isabella's waist. She was the perfect accessory, the pregnant, glowing wife that solidified his image as a stable, respectable titan of industry. She smiled until her cheeks ached, and then she saw her, standing by the main bar, holding a tablet and speaking into David's ear, was a young woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a sleek black bob. She was wearing a chic, minimalist dress that was both professional and subtly alluring. It was Amelia Vance, David's executive assistant. As Amelia laughed at something David said, her head tilting back slightly, the sound cut through the din of the party and hit Isabella with the force of a physical blow. It was the same light, cruel laugh from the phone call. The world narrowed to the space between the three of them. David, oblivious. Amelia, confident and proprietary. And Isabella, watching, her heart turning to a block of ice. David led her over. Izzy, you know Amelia, of course. The woman who keeps my life from falling into chaos. Of course, Isabella said, her voice smooth as glass. She extended her hand, her eyes locking with Amelia's. It's lovely to see you again, Amelia. David is so lucky to have someone so dedicated. She put the slightest emphasis on the last word, a microscopic shift in tone that only she could feel. Amelia's smile didn't falter, but for a fraction of a second, Isabella saw a flicker in her eyes, a quick, assessing glance. It was the look of a rival, sizing up the competition. Amelia didn't see a victim. She saw an obstacle. For the rest of the evening, Isabella watched them. It was a masterclass in covert intimacy. A shared glance across the room, a brief touch of his hand on the small of her back as she passed him a document. The way he leaned in, his head close to hers, under the guise of discussing business. They moved around each other with the unconscious familiarity of long-term lovers, hiding in plain sight. No one else saw it. They only saw the powerful CEO and his efficient assistant. But Isabella saw everything, every stolen moment, every secret smile. It was no longer just a suspicion. It was a performance. And she was the only one in the audience who knew the script was a lie. She sipped her sparkling water, the diamond bracelet on her wrist feeling colder and heavier with every passing minute. This was his world, built on lies and facades, and she would let him play his part, right up until the moment she brought the entire stage crashing down. The gala was the confirmation she needed, the final, visceral proof that stripped away any lingering sliver of doubt. Now, fueled by a cold, righteous anger, Isabella transformed. The grieving wife was buried. The forensic architect took her place. Her new project was the complete deconstruction of her husband's life. His home office, once a foreign territory, became her excavation site. She waited until he left for a supposed 2-day business trip to Dallas, a trip she now knew was a lie. The moment his car was gone, she walked into the room, not with the trepidation of a trespasser, but with the authority of an auditor. She started with his diaries, not personal journals, but meticulous moleskin planners where he logged his meetings and travel. She cross-referenced them with her own calendar, her old emails, her memories. A pattern emerged with sickening clarity. Conference call were Hong Kong investors, 10 p.m. A night he came home, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers. Emergency board dinner. A weekend he'd been unreachable for 6 hours because his phone had died. Tech Summit, Miami, March 12th to 14. The dates pulsed on the page. She remembered that weekend vividly. He had called her every night, his voice filled with feigned exhaustion, telling her how much he missed her. With a growing sense of dread, she moved to his computer. He was arrogant enough to use a simple password. Her birthday. The irony was a bitter pill. She navigated to Amelia Vance's social media profiles. Her Instagram was public, a carefully curated feed of a glamorous young professional on the rise. Isabella scrolled back, her fingers flying across the trackpad, and there it was. March 13th, a photo of Amelia, smiling on a balcony, a turquoise ocean stretching out behind her. She was holding a cocktail, wearing oversized sunglasses. The caption was innocuous. Sometimes you just need a little sunshine and salt air. Yet work perks, Jos Miami. The background, however, was unmistakable. The distinct Art Deco lines of the hotel balcony, the specific shade of the ocean. It was the St. Regis Ball Harbour. Isabella's breath caught in her chest. She remembered David mentioning the summit was being held at a generic convention center downtown. A lie. So blatant. So arrogant. The final piece of the puzzle lay deeper. She knew David kept a separate credit card for discretionary expenses, a black Amex with no limit, and, he thought, no oversight. It took her an hour of searching through his physical files. Hidden in a locked drawer, she managed to pry open with a letter opener, but she found them. The paper statements. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning line items for hotels, restaurants, flights, and then she saw it. A charge from March for $40,682.15. The vendor, the St. Regis Bowel Harbour. The name on the folio, Mr. and Mrs. Vance. Her blood ran cold. The sheer, calculated audacity of it stole her breath. He hadn't just taken his mistress on a trip. He had checked them in under her name, using his secret credit card to pay for it, all while calling his pregnant wife to tell her he missed her. He had erased Isabella and replaced her with Amelia, creating a fantasy of a life he truly wanted, even if just for a weekend. This was the smoking gun. This was not a mistake, a moment of weakness. This was a premeditated, long-running conspiracy against her, against their marriage, against their child. She took out her phone and methodically photographed every piece of evidence. The planner entries, the Instagram post, the credit card statement. She saved them to a secure cloud server, then created a separate folder on a thumb drive she hid in her jewelry box. Her work was almost done. She had the what, the who, the when, and the where. Now she needed professional guidance on how. The next morning, she made an appointment she never thought she'd need. She called the top divorce attorney in Austin, a woman known for her discretion and her ruthlessness. When she met Julian Croft, a sharp, empathetic woman in her 50s, Isabella didn't cry. She didn't rage. She calmly laid out the printed photographs on the polished mahogany desk. "My husband doesn't know I'm here," Isabella began, her voice even. "He doesn't know that I know. He thinks I'm at home, planning a baby shower." Julian looked at the evidence, then back at the composed, pregnant woman sitting before her. She saw past the designer handbag and the diamond bracelet. She saw the steel. "Mrs. Jones," the lawyer said, a note of respect in her voice. "What is it you want?" Isabella met her gaze without blinking. "I want to be free," she said. "But I want to leave a crater where my marriage used to be." Isabella chose her moment with the cold precision of a demolition expert. It was a Thursday night, a week after her meeting with Julian Croft. David was at another late-night strategy session, a phrase that had become a euphemism for his betrayal. She sat in the dark living room, the city lights below, casting long, dancing shadows on the marble floor. The house had never felt more like a mausoleum. Her plan, as outlined with Julian, was in motion. Assets were being discreetly traced. A new apartment had been secured under her maiden name. Her escape was planned. All that was left was to light the fuse. She didn't wait for him to come home, to perform another act in their domestic tragedy. Confronting him in person would give him the opportunity to use his charisma, his well-practiced manipulations. He could touch her, plead with her, gaslight her until she questioned her own sanity. She would not give him that power. This would be clean, clinical, and final. On her terms. She dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and untroubled. "Is he? Everything okay? Is it the baby?" The feigned concern was automatic, a well-oiled part of his deception. "The baby is fine, David," she said. Her voice was calm, almost unnervingly so. It was not the voice of the wife he knew. "But we aren't. Our marriage is over." A beat of silence on the other end. Not comprehension, but confusion. This was not in his script. "What are you talking about? Did something happen? Are you feeling all right?" Isabella almost laughed at the immediate implication that she was unwell, hormonal, irrational. It was so predictable. "I've never felt more clear in my entire life," she replied. her voice dropping a degree, becoming colder. "I heard you, David. The other night, after you said you loved me." The silence that followed was different. It was heavy, dense, charged with the dawning horror of discovery. She could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the frantic search through his memory. I don't know what you mean," he stammered, his verbal armor cracking. "You forgot to hang up," she stated simply. There was no accusation in her tone, just a flat statement of fact. I heard everything, every word, every laugh. She let the reality of his mistake sink in, picturing the blood draining from his face. She pictured him in a sterile hotel room or a sleek downtown apartment. Amelia at his side, both of them frozen in the act of being caught. "I heard Amelia call you husband," she continued, twisting the knife he had sharpened himself. "I heard you both laughing about how easy I was to deceive, laughing about me being at home, fluffing pillows in the nursery." "Izzy, no, listen to me," he started, his voice a jumble of panic and disbelief. "You must have misunderstood. It was a joke, a stupid, unprofessional joke." "We were drinking," she cut him off, her voice sharp and final. "Stop. Do not insult my intelligence by trying to lie your way out of this. I heard you. I know about Miami. I know you checked into the St. Regis as Mr. and Mrs. Vance. I know everything." The line went completely dead with shock. She had just detonated a bomb in the middle of his carefully constructed world, and he hadn't even seen the flash. He finally found his voice, a pathetic, desperate whisper. "Isabella, I'm sorry. Please let me come home. We can talk about this. We can fix this." This was the moment she had braced herself for. The pleading, the promises, the remorse that was born not of guilt, but of getting caught. "There is nothing to fix, David," she said. And for the first time, she allowed a tremor of the immense pain he had caused to enter her voice. "You didn't just break a promise. You broke the entire foundation of our life together. I don't need your excuses. I don't need your apologies. I just needed the truth. And for once, you gave it to me." She paused, took a deep breath, and delivered the final sentence. "Thank you for forgetting to hang up. You've set me free." And with that, she ended the call. She didn't throw the phone. She placed it gently on the table, stood up, and walked toward the bedroom to retrieve her bags. The silence she left on the line was the sound of his world beginning to burn. The phone call was not an end. It was an activation. The moment she disconnected, Isabella moved with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. The grief and shock that had paralyzed her were now transmuted into fuel. There was no hysteria, no frantic rush. There was only the methodical execution of a well-laid plan. Her bags were already packed, hidden in the back of the spacious walk-in closet. Not everything, just the essentials. Clothes, toiletries, the important documents she had gathered. She also had a small fire-proof box containing the thumb drive of evidence, copies of her financial records, and the ultrasound photos of her daughter. Her past, her present, and her future, all contained in one neat package. She walked through the silent, opulent rooms one last time. The house, once a symbol of her husband's success, now felt like a cold, elaborate stage set for a play that had abruptly ended. The portrait of them in the living room seemed to mock her, a monument to a colossal lie. She didn't feel sadness looking at it, only a profound sense of detachment, as if she were looking at two strangers. In the master bedroom, she went to her nightstand and opened the velvet-lined drawer. She took out a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored stationery, her personal stationery, bearing her maiden name, Isabella Rossi. She hadn't used it since she'd gotten married, Using it now was a reclamation. Her letter was brief, its brevity a statement in itself. It contained no anger, no recriminations, no pleas for understanding. An emotional tirade would give him something to react to, something to dismiss as the ramblings of a scorned woman. This was a corporate dissolution. David, by the time you read this, I will be gone. There is nothing left to say that wasn't already said by you when you thought I wasn't listening. There is nothing to discuss and nothing to salvage. My lawyer will be in contact with yours, Isabella. She didn't sign it with love or even with her married name. She signed the name she was born with, the name she would give to her daughter. She placed the letter on the center of his perfectly made pillow. Next to it, she laid 2 items. First, her wedding ring, a flawless 5-carat diamond that had once felt like the center of her universe. Now it looked like a piece of glass. Second, she unclasped the diamond bracelet he had given her the morning after the phone call, the guilt gift, the blood money. She placed it beside the ring. Let him choke on his glittering lies. With that final act, she turned and walked away without a second glance. She took nothing he had given her, save for the child he had unwittingly helped her create, a child who would now be raised far from the poison of his deceit. She walked out the front door, the cool night air hitting her face like a benediction. She didn't look back at the glass and steel cage. It was his prison now, not hers. She got into her own car, a practical SUV she had insisted on buying over the sports car he had wanted for her, and started the engine. As she drove down the long, winding driveway, she saw the lights of Austin twinkling ahead. They were no longer a distant, cold constellation. They were a beacon, a promise of a new life, a life that would be smaller, perhaps, but it would be real. It would be hers. This was not an escape. It was a liberation. She was not a woman running away from a broken home. She was a woman driving toward a new one, with her head held high and the future stirring inside her. David Jones drove like a man possessed, the Aston Martin's engine screaming through the quiet, wealthy hills of Austin. His mind was a maelstrom of panic and disbelief. She knows. She knows everything. How? The phone call replayed in his head, her calm, icy voice slicing through his arrogance with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. It was the unnatural calm that terrified him the most. He burst through the front door of the mansion, shouting her name. "Isabella! Izzy!" The only answer was the echo of his own voice, hollow and pathetic in the cavernous space. The house was deathly still. A profound and unnerving silence had taken root, a silence that felt heavier than mere emptiness. It felt like an absence. He took the marble stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding with a fear he hadn't felt since his company was on the brink of collapse years ago. He stormed into their bedroom. The first thing he saw was the letter, a single cream-colored sheet resting on his pillow like a death certificate. Beside it, the diamond ring and the bracelet glittered under the recessed lighting. Twin accusations. His hands trembled as he read the note. The cold, formal words offered no purchase for argument, no opening for apology. It was a closed door. A sealed verdict. My lawyer will be in contact with yours. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a declaration of war. In the days that followed, David's world began to systematically unravel. The first blow was the formal letter from Julian Croft, an attorney whose reputation for dismantling powerful men preceded her. The letter was accompanied by a preliminary petition for divorce, citing infidelity. It was a quiet, professional opening salvo, but David knew what it meant. The social fallout was immediate and brutal. News in their rarefied circle traveled not like a ripple, but like a shock wave. Phone calls to friends, Powerful allies who had dined at his table and vacationed on his yacht were met with cool, clipped responses. His invitations were politely declined. He was suddenly persona non grata, the man who had committed the unforgivable sin in their world, not the infidelity itself, but the sloppiness of getting caught and creating a public scandal with a pregnant wife. Amelia Vance was the next casualty. Panicked by David's frantic, accusatory calls and unprepared for the icy glares she received at the office, she saw her future as a powerful partner evaporate. She was not David's queen. She was his liability. Within a week, she submitted her resignation via email and disappeared, refusing to be the public face of his disgrace. Her ambition did not extend to being a scapegoat. The professional repercussions were even more devastating. David was in the middle of a critical merger, a deal built on trust and an image of stability. A key investor, a staunch family man, and a casual acquaintance of Isabella's father pulled out, citing a sudden crisis of confidence in the leadership. The rumor mill on Wall Street churned, and Ethelred Capital's stock, once a pillar of strength, began to show cracks. David was left utterly alone in his glass fortress, haunted by the silence. The rooms, once a symbol of his power, now mocked him with their emptiness. He tried calling Isabella's cell phone, but it went straight to a disconnected message. He called her mother, who listened to his entire rambling, desperate apology before saying, "You have made your bed, David. Now you must lie in it alone." And hanging up, he called her closest friend, who simply laughed and said, "She's better off," before blocking his number. He was isolated by his own actions, a king in a kingdom of one. He would sit in the nursery, a room he had rarely entered before, and stare at the empty crib. He was surrounded by immense wealth, but he was bankrupt in every way that truly mattered. He hadn't just lost a wife, he had lost his anchor, his public shield, his best asset, and in the suffocating silence of his perfect mansion, he was finally forced to confront the deafening echo of his own choices. 6 months later, the ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel buzzed with the energy of hundreds of women. It was the annual Women in Leadership Summit, a gathering of female entrepreneurs, executives, and innovators. Seated at a table near the back, Isabella Rossi listened intently to a panel discussion on resilient leadership. She looked different. The soft, waiting quality she once had was gone, replaced by a calm, centered strength. She was no longer a wife in the shadow of a powerful man. She was simply herself. With her was her daughter, Grace, sleeping soundly in a carrier beside her. Grace was 3 months old, a beautiful, serene baby, with Isabella's dark eyes and a full head of black hair. She was the center of Isabella's new world, the tangible proof that life could begin again from the rubble. During a breakout session on overcoming personal and professional adversity, the moderator encouraged attendees to share their stories. Hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, Isabella stood up. "A little over half a year ago, my entire world was demolished by a single accidental phone call," she began, her voice clear and steady. The room quieted. "I learned that the life I was living was a lie, and that the person I trusted most saw me as an asset, and I was pregnant." She didn't share the sordid details. She didn't need to. She spoke about the power of silence, of strategy over screaming. She talked about turning the act of listening into the act of liberation. "I realized that being the victim of a betrayal doesn't mean you have to adopt a victim's mindset," she concluded. "Sometimes, the quietest exit makes the loudest statement." A wave of supportive applause washed over her as she sat down, a few women reaching out to touch her arm in solidarity. She hadn't shared her story for pity, but to close a chapter, to reframe her narrative from one of pain to one of power. Later, during a coffee break, a familiar voice called her name. "Isabella?" She turned to see Julian Croft, her lawyer, holding a plate of pastries. He had been a speaker on a panel about ethical corporate governance. "Julian," she smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "I didn't know you were attending." "I should say the same to you," he said, his eyes twinkling. He gestured to the sleeping baby. "And this must be the famous Grace. She's beautiful." "Thank you." Their conversation was easy and respectful. He had been a fierce advocate for her during the divorce, which had settled quietly and overwhelmingly in her favor. David, facing a PR nightmare and a collapsing merger, had agreed to all of her terms without a fight. He had wanted the problem to go away. "I heard what you said in the breakout session," Julian said, his tone sincere. "It was incredibly powerful. You've rebuilt everything on your own terms." "I had good counsel," she replied with a small smile. Their conversation lingered, moving from law and business to architecture and the challenges of raising a strong daughter. It was the first time she had spoken to a man without the ghost of her marriage hovering between them. It was just a conversation. Two professionals, two people connecting. It was simple, and it was a revelation. Later that week, Isabella sat on a bench in a sun-drenched park, Grace cooing in a bassinet beside her. The air was warm, filled with the laughter of children. She took out a new journal, this one bound in soft blue leather. She opened it to the first page. For months, she hadn't been able to write. The old journal from that first night, too full of pain to even open. But now, it was time for a new story. She uncapped her pen and began to write the final entry for a chapter of her life that was now truly over. David forgot to hang up the phone that night, and for a long time, I thought that was the moment my life ended. But I was wrong. That was the moment it began. He thought my world was small enough to fit inside his pocket, but he was mistaken. It was just waiting to be built. And this time, I'm the architect. He left the line open, but I was the one who listened, who learned, and who hung up for good. Thank you for the wake-up call. She closed the journal, a sense of profound peace settling over her. She looked at her daughter, a new life, a new beginning, and smiled. The sun was warm on her face, and for the first time in a long, long time, she felt free. Isabella's journey from a shattered wife in a gilded cage to the empowered architect of her own life is a testament to the incredible strength found in the quietest moments of resolve. Her story proves that true power isn't about shouting the loudest, but about listening, planning, and making the deliberate choice to walk away with your dignity intact. She turned a devastating betrayal into a catalyst for rebirth, reminding us all that our worth is not determined by those who deceive us, but by how we choose to rebuild in the aftermath. Her silence was not weakness. It was the crucible where her new life was forged. If Isabella's story of turning betrayal into triumph resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they hold the blueprints to their own future. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of survival and strength. What was the moment you knew she had won? Let us know in the comments below.